So this is the last section of this chapter. We're going to go ahead and render this shot and create something that we can actually post on the internet. Now again, I know this is super simple, but my goal with this section is to help you understand the principles of working between all the different parts of Unreal, between materials and textures and objects, etc. So if we want to go ahead and render this shot and create something that we can post on the internet, online, the first thing that we need to add is something called a level sequence. So the first thing that we're going to do is go to our main content folder, and what I like to do is right click in the empty space. I'll add a new folder, and I'll type underscore sequences in all caps. You can just call it sequences, call it whatever you want, and I'll go into that folder. Now from here, you could right click in the empty space, go to cinematics, and find a level sequence. You could also right click in the empty space and type level sequence, and it'll find a level sequence right there. Or you could go up to this clapboard right here and click add level sequence, and then choose the folder that you want to add and add your level sequence. So we'll just do it that way. We'll call this my first render, like that. Cool. So now if you're familiar with something like Adobe Premiere, After Effects, you're going to get a timeline down here. I'm going to show you my settings. So first things first is I typically like working in 24 frames per second. Some people say 30. It really just depends on your preferred style of filmmaking. And now from here, we're going to go ahead and take this camera that we added in the last video and drop this into our level sequence. So right now we have nothing animated, and I want to share with you what we're looking at. So the first thing is this thing called a camera cuts, and you need a camera cuts to render anything in Unreal. Now we can see that this camera cuts is looking at our camera. So if we right click on the camera cuts, go to properties, we can see that it's bound camera binding ID to camera 001. So cool. The other thing that we need to acknowledge is this green and red bar at the in and out of our sequence. So this is going to render a certain amount of frames, and the frames is indicated by the bars, the red and green. So the in point is at frame 0, and then the out point is, I moved it, it was originally at frame 120. The default of Unreal rendering is a 120 frame animation, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to a 240 frame animation. So I'm going to go ahead and move my playhead there, drag my out point. Now it's very important that you make sure that your cam 001, this, like a video editor, is also going to the in and out point. Now for safety, what I do is I always just extend it just beyond the bounds just a little bit, like so. So cool, we have our in and out point. Now from here, what I want to do is I want to animate this shield. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our outliner, find our simple shield, and drop this into our level sequencer. The reason why you do this is now the level sequencer is going to reference whatever's in our outliner, and we can start animating some stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the very beginning at frame 0, and just like anything in After Effects, Premiere, Cinema 4D, Blender, you have the ability to add a keyframe. So I'll add a keyframe right there, and now we have a keyframe for all the properties where it's at location of 80 and a rotation of 90. Now if I go ahead and drag my playhead to the very end of my animation, I'm going to go ahead and change this value from 90 to, let's say, like 360. So now it's going to rotate, but it didn't add a keyframe here. So what we need to do is first, and the way I like to work is I turn on this button, which is basically auto keyframing. So every single time you change a property, it's going to add a new keyframe, and under this drop down menu here, it's going to allow you to only change, it'll add a keyframe for things that are changed, or the key all. I just set it to key all, but again, these are some more advanced principles. I just like turning on auto keyframing, so if I change something, we can set this to, I don't know, 360 plus 90 was that 450, so 450. So now, if I go ahead and preview this, it's going to spin. It's going to rotate, like so. Awesome. Now, I did realize I made a little boo-boo, and I'm just going to keep this in the tutorial. The axis point of the shield, it looks like it's not quite centered. So, fortunately, with Unreal, you can go ahead and change some things. So, I'm just going to quickly switch to my modeling mode. And then under my X-form property, I have this property called Edit Pivot. I'm going to make sure I select my simple shield, go to Edit Pivot, make sure that it's at center, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit Accept, and now it should rotate around the exact center of that object. So, cool. Awesome, we have a spinning shield. What I want to do from here is go into my camera. I'm going to go ahead and reposition this just a little bit. Maybe pull it back, maybe go a little bit higher in Z space. I'm going to click on my shield and then see that the Z value is 80. So I'll also go to my camera and set this value, camera, my transform to 80 as well. So it's going to be directly dead center. Awesome, super cool. So now we have this spinning shield. Now, what I don't like about this is, let's say I wanted this to be an infinite loop. It kind of starts slow, goes fast, and then it kind of slows down again. And let's say I wanted to, in post, I wanted to have this loop even more. I just wanted to continue on Instagram and just look like it's constantly spinning. So the reason why that's happening is it's using eased keyframes. So if I go ahead and select my keyframes down here by making a box around them, I can see that I have them selected by the little blue outline, and I'm going to go ahead and select this button right here. This is show the animation keys in a curve editor. So I can bring that up, and we can see that it's going to open up this new tab called the sequencer curves, and I'm going to go ahead and select my simple shield right here. And we can see here that we have this curved line. Now I don't want the curved line, so I'm going to go ahead and select all the keyframes, just make a big box around everything, and I'm going to go ahead and set the linear interpolation, or the interpolation of the keys from cubic auto to linear. And now when I go ahead and watch this, it's going to go ahead and do a 360-degree spin like so, and then it'll stop. But because if I turn on this button right here into looping, if I go ahead and play that back, it's going to go ahead and make it even. It's going to go ahead and just have that animation go continuously forever, even though the out point is at frame 240. So you could loop this if you wanted to in post. So long story short, you could post this to the internet if you want to, which we'll talk about now. We have the animation done. We have some basic curves. You could do more fancy things like have this float. We're not going to cover that. We'll cover that in the next section on actually how to animate. But from here, we have our sequence. We're ready to go. We're ready to render out this shot. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hit this clapboard right here. The clapboard is going to open up something called the movie render queue. Now what the movie render queue is it's basically saying what we're going to render, my first render, which is going to be this level sequence down here, and we're going to use these settings, and it's going to output to this folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this button, the unsaved config, and we're going to go ahead and just change a couple things so that we can actually get something that we can post on the internet. So the first thing we're going to get rid of is the JPEG sequence. We don't want that. We're instead going to go ahead and add our settings, and then go ahead and add a H.264 template right here. And then we're going to make sure that we set the quality. So right now we have the encoding rate to quality, and we're going to set the constant rate factor to 16. And for at the time of this recording this video, a lower number will actually give you better quality. You could also include audio if you wanted to, so you could import music into this level sequence, but we're not going to for this tutorial. So we have our MP4, we have deferred rendering, which is basically going to render anything inside our viewport, which is pretty cool. And then we're going to add a couple more things. So the first thing we'll add is our game overrides, and that will basically brute force the highest quality settings possible regardless of our graphics card. So they will basically make our viewport look as good as Unreal can. It's not going to be like an amazing thing unless you add in a bunch of cool visual effects and stuff, but it'll try and make it look as if it's the highest quality possible. Now, if you don't know what the quality that is in Unreal, if you go to this speedometer right here and you go to your viewport scalability, we can see here that we have different sort of like graphics card settings for our viewport. So if I go ahead and move my movie render queue over for a bit, and I go ahead and accept my config right there, if I go to my speedometer viewport scale and I set this to low, it's going to make it look way worse because now it's not going to put as much pressure on the graphics card. Versus if I set this to cinematic, it's going to try and get the best lighting quality, the best shadow quality that Unreal can muster up. So that being said, that's what game overrides does. It basically just brute forces to cinematic quality setting with this tick box, and then does a couple other things on the back end so that we as artists don't need to worry about some game development stuff. Now the last thing I always add is some anti-aliasing, and I will typically keep it really simple. So anti-aliasing is going to try and get rid of some of those weird jaggedy edges that you might see in a typical video game. So with anti-aliasing, I will set my temporal count from 1 to 8. I will tick on override anti-aliasing, and I will set my anti-aliasing method to none. I will go ahead and render my warm-up frame, so I'll go ahead and hit this tick box. I'll go to my advanced tab and set my render warm-up count to 48 and my engine warm-up count to 48. Now once that's done, the very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my output tab. And under my output tab, I can go ahead and set my output directory. So this is going to be where I save my render. By default, it will put it in a folder called your saved movie renders under Unreal. So if you go to our first Unreal project, go to saved right here, we'll see it'll have it actually hasn't made it here yet, but it'll make that movie render folder. But I'm actually just going to put this on my desktop, so I'll call this Jags Shield course tutorial render, and just put it inside this folder. Hit select folder, and just to show how awesome Unreal is, I'll set this to 3840 by 2160, so I'll make a 4K render. It will be a little bit slower, but it'll still be a really cool render, so I'll go ahead and be okay with all of that stuff. And from here we can go ahead and hit accept, and we could go ahead and save this. We'll talk about the render settings that we just made. We could save that as a preset, but we'll do that later in the course. For now, we can just go ahead and hit render. And you might see a preview that says compiling shaders, but now once that's done, it'll create a preview of your render, and it'll just start cooking. So because I'm rendering a 4K image and it's going to be spinning, this is going to take me about 5 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and just let this cook, and when we come back, we will go ahead and preview the render. So after about 4 or 5 minutes, that render is done, and fortunately with Unreal, you can go ahead and click on this link to your output, and it'll bring you directly to your folder, and you can double click and preview your render, and I'd say this looks pretty sweet. Yeah, it looks super seamless. We created a cool spin, and we actually did cover a lot in this section, between like all the basics of just creating materials, importing assets, doing some basic lighting. So I really do hope you got something out of this section of the course. I know it's super simple what we covered, but what I really wanted to hammer home is the basics of working with a process in Unreal, but also understanding that we might bounce back and forth between making materials to lighting to rendering a shot. So I hope you learned something, and in the next one we're going to do something way more exciting. We're going to be making some actual social media content that you can post on the internet. So until then, I hope you enjoy the next homework assignment, and that's going to be basically recreating this. I know it's super simple, but if you know me or have followed me for a little while, I talk about powerlifting a lot, and sometimes you just have to work on practice and technique, and sometimes technique is where you're going to get the most gains, even though it's not going to be the super most sexy part of the process. So hope you learned something, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.